Well, hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Guide London, the website of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides, based here in the beautiful city of London. As you might be able to tell, we're having a bit of a grey and dark day today, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We very much look forward to taking you on a little adventure over the next 30 minutes or so. My name is Katherine, and I am one of 600 or so guides represented by the APTG and the Guide London website here. And as many of you may know, I know plenty of you are tuning in week after week. You may well know that we have been doing these little broadcasts at 4 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon to bring you some wonderful, interesting stories and people and places about this incredible city. And we do have a wonderful treat in store for you today in honour of St. Patrick's Day. We're going to be joined by my wonderful colleague, Tony, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. In the meantime, do please feel free to pop into the comments where you're joining us from. We always love to know what part of the world you're coming from. Let us know if you've got any Irish roots, any Irish heritage. Are you joining us from Ireland? We'd love to know. And if you have any questions as we go along for Tony or myself, please pop those in the comments section as well. We will do our best to answer them. If you're watching this later on, if you're watching it on repeat, why not stick you where you're calling from in there anyway? We like to come back and read the comments too. Maybe we'll shout you out in a future broadcast. So do say hello. I can see someone's joined us from Chester. Hi, Peter from Chester. Hope you're keeping well. Welcome, everybody. So as I say, our topic for today is a bit of fun. We are going to be having a little look at St. Patrick's Day and the Irish in London. And to talk about that, I am very pleased to welcome my colleague, Tony McDonnell. Good afternoon, Tony. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Keeping well?
I'm very, very well indeed. I'm grand.
Perfect, perfect. Well, without further ado, everybody, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to hand over to Tony, and he is going to take you on a wonderful journey through Irish London. Oh, I nearly got rid of you, Tony. I'll remove myself and Tony will take you on a journey.
Thank you very much indeed, Katie. And Cade Mila Fulcher, those words will come up in a moment. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony McDonnell. I am a London Blue Badge Guide. I've been a London Blue Badge Guide for many years, but for the past 16 years or so, I have been doing walking tours on the topic of the Irish in London. Now, you're going to think to yourself, I know accents, and that is not an Irish accent. I was born and brought up in London, but my parents were from Ireland. They landed from Mayo in London in 1947. And that made us, the whole family and everybody else, a part of a huge phenomenon called the Irish Diaspora. And that Irish diaspora, nowadays they claim is about 80 million people living now will claim descendants from Ireland. And it was a very special time that people were coming over just after the Second World War. From Ireland, people were leaving at the rate of 400,000 people a year were leaving Ireland. It was the biggest emigration wave since the Great Famine of the 19th century. And of the people of that huge wave who were coming over, the majority of them were coming to Britain, and a large majority of that would have been coming to London. And I grew up in London in the 50s and the 60s. That makes me, I was living in the largest Irish community on earth. Hey, I can hear you already in Liverpool and Boston and New York and Chicago. No, surely not. It is the case, even Dublin. But they say that there was probably 700,000 Irish people living in London by the early 60s. And we used to tell people, we built London. I'd be taken around by my father and he'd point out places like the Festival Hall, if you know that is, we built that. And he would say the Victoria Line was built by the Irish. And perhaps the last great structure that was predominantly built by Irish men, it should be said, that was the great barrier down on the docks. So that sort of puts it in perspective. I'm coming from this great Irish city, but The other thing is that I tell people when I do my walks is that we're going to show you Irish history where it actually happened, on the streets of London. Another provocative thing to say. Nonetheless, I think I can justify that when I give my talk. The other thing I want to do is just to put it in perspective and go back in history. When have the Irish been coming to London? I would say, well, there's some people say the Romans. I'd go back about 850 years ago when the English became interested in Ireland and in itself. But I would also go back to the Tudor period. So we're going back about 450 plus years ago, during the time of King Henry VIII and also his daughter, and that was Queen Elizabeth I. And that's when the first Irish are recorded. And if we can have our next, we'll have the map of England. It's not, it's the map of London. And just have a look down there. I'm going to try and point out here. At the end here, we've got the Tower of London on the banks of the River Thames. To the right of it is what we would now call the Radcliffe Highway. We'd call it the parish of St George, and it's around the east end of London, just outside there. And what the Mint is now, that was an Irish settlement was there. They said Irish beggars were there, and that was the first of them. That was during the Tudor period, and that east end of London, all around here, up towards Whitechapel and across the river down towards Southwark and Bermondsey, they were traditional Irish areas. The Irish were settling there all the way through to really the 20th century. That's where you would have found them. The other place where you began to find Irish from the 17th and 18th century was where I'm pointing to now. We're around by Covent Garden, and we're going into the area of St Giles Rookery was the area that was called. So that's where they would have been in the 1720s. They didn't call it St Giles. That one of the names they had for it was the Holy Land, and close by was another place that was called Tipperary, but that was actually Soho Square was where that was. So all these names, if we're looking for where the Irish came in the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, we move a bit further north to the area of Camden Town, and then we go to County Kilburn down there, just to the west of it. The other place that I've got on the map, because it's not far from where I came from, is Hammersmith, because I've noticed doing this walk or this talk is that we mention Hammersmith quite a bit. So let's go back to St Giles, shall we? Just to show you the church itself. There it is, a beautiful 18th century church. So we're just north of Covent Garden. We're not far from Oxford Street. And the thing about St Giles is from about the 1720s or even earlier, people had been coming from Ireland. They were working as labourers in the fields, and then the fruit and vegetable market got going in Covent Garden, and that's where they began to find work. They were working as porters. They were working as costermongers, selling the fruit and vegetable. There were pubs to be had, and they could be run by Irish people. There was domestic service as well. Another group of people who were associated with the Irish at this time, one group of workers, they were the chairmen who would take people around Covent Garden. And these were the working classes we've been talking about so far. But what about the ascendancy class, as they would have been called, the rather prosperous Protestants who were coming to London? And with one of the places that the ascendancy began to dominate is in the theatre. And we're going to take you back into Covent Garden and show you the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And there they are. There weren't two of them. There's only been one theatre on the site, but there's been 6 of them, if you know what I mean. So there've been, it's not even 6, it's 4. But the Theatre Lane, Drury Lane in the 1775, and as it was rebuilt and opened in 1809, and you can see what they've got on there. That was Charlie and his chocolate factory. The reason why I'm talking about them, this is where the Irish began to come in, and something that the Irish would probably claim that they are still dominant in terms of playwrights, in terms of actors, and in terms of managers as well. And just to sort of rub that in, back in 1954, a very prominent drama critic in this country wrote the following: English drama is a procession of glittering Irishmen, Farquhar, Goldsmith, Sheridan, Shaw, Wilde, Synge, and O'Casey. We should not mourn that there are no great English playwrights. We should marvel that there are any English playwrights at all. So that gives you an idea of the kind of hegemony that we still have. And we get all kinds of people still like who are dominant around in the theatre world who are Irish. Back in the late 18th century, there was one particular woman who was taking the place by storm. There were many other Irish actresses who were dominant at this time, but this one, you see her, you got this. I love this, Mrs. Dora Jordan, Dorothea Jordan, they call her here. Now, Dora Jordan was what she was better known. She wasn't a Mrs. She wasn't married to anyone. She had come from Ireland. She'd been trained at the Smock Alley Theatre in Dublin. And when she did eventually arrive here at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and it was in the 1780s, she was an overnight sensation. And she rapidly became the leading comic actress of her day. And the manager of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane was paying her 36 guineas a week, an absolute fortune. But she began to attract the eye of people. And one of the men she attracted the eye was of a royal prince. Now, what we're talking about, royal princes and actresses. Well, this is Prince William. He was actually known as the Duke of Clarence, and he was the third son of George III. And he sort of, they got together when in the 1890s, and they did stay together for a number of years, to the extent that they had 10 children. Now, she was never given a title, and she was never a Mrs. They never married. They lived down in southwest London. She would act throughout this time. She was touring as well, and she and William were an item. It all went wrong when he suddenly realised that he had a very good chance of being king. And poor old Dorothea Jordan was dumped unceremoniously and died in France. So just one of those stories that come out. We still have them, by the way. They're called the Fitzclarences. And anyone who can remember a prime minister of this country from a few years ago called David Cameron, he was a direct descent. He was descended from this couple. So there we are. The Irish are coming over. They're writing plays. What about other people? Let's go to the 19th century, and we'll go to a pub. And the pub here is on Fleet Street, and the old Cheshire Cheese. And you see it was rebuilt in 1677. It actually dates from the 16th century. And it was here on Fleet Street in 1890 that an ambitious young Irish writer decided that he would get together with other poets, and they would have evenings together in the upper room here in the Cheshire Cheese and read their poems to each other. He's got a lovely photograph there. There he is, William Butler Yates. William Butler Yates was born in Dublin, but as a child he lived in London because his father had decided to become an artist, and the family went back and forth between Dublin and London. His true love was where his mother came from, which was Sligo. And he had been in Dublin. He came back to London, professed that he didn't like. He was living in West London, over in Chiswick and Hammersmith area. That's where he met the great love of his life. And I hope she'll be appearing any second now. Her name was Maud Gonne. So Maud Gonne was an actress. And she was also a bit of a revolutionary and remained so throughout her life. And at one stage, that Yates was also regarded himself as a revolutionary, but they were unrequited in their love. They never married, even though she was his muse for many years. She was his muse when he was at the Rhymers Club with the other poets. And it was around that time that things began to improve for him, and he moved out of Chiswick, and then he moved for 25 years. He lived in a place that we call Bloomsbury, there for about 6 months of the year. And then other times he'd be elsewhere, like Sligo or Galway, where he was with somebody called Lady Gregory. But it's worthwhile that, he was definitely part of the establishment when he was living here in London. He was even offered a knighthood. What we're going to do now is arise and get our Guinness free. We're going to go down to Covent Garden again, and we're going to take you to this lovely church. And this is the church of St. Paul's, Covent Garden. It's known as the Actors' Church. And the reason why we're here is we're going to talk about another one of these young men from Dublin who came over here in the 19th century. And there he is, about the time he got married, and that's George Bernard Shaw. And the reason why we're looking at this church is one of his great plays is set here in London, and some people have said it's the best play about London, the best play about the class differences, and it was called Pygmalion, and it opened in 1914. And it's about a flower girl from Covent Garden who's passed off as a lady. And Shaw's perhaps his best work, but Shaw was not only a playwright, though people now remember him as that. He was also a music critic, he was a journalist, and he was a political activist. He was involved in the Fabian movement. And one of the things that I suppose people can now thank him for is women's toilets, free women's toilets. This is one of he's always given credit for achieving that. So that was Shaw and his one booth part. And where the church is just around the corner from where he got married. And he got married in 1898. He married a nice Irish girl, a girl from County Court, Charlotte Payne Townsend. We're going to take you to the other side of Covent Garden now, to this building. This building is about to be converted into a museum and a hotel. It is Bow Street Police Station and Bow Street's Magistrates Court. And the reason why we're here is that we're going to remember the evening of the 5th of April, 1895, when a hansom cab pulled up. Two policemen were escorting a burly Irishman, a little the worse for drink. That Irishman's name was Oscar Wilde. And here he is. Now, Oscar Wilde at this time, he'd come over from Dublin, it goes without saying, but he went to Trinity College, he went to Oxford University, and he came to London in the late 1870s. And he said he didn't know what he was going to do, but he was going to be notorious. Well, you shouldn't believe your own prophecies, because he was the #1 celebrity in London, I think it's fair to say. He had 3 plays running in London on that night. The Importance of Being Earnest has been called the wittiest play in the English language. Why was he there? Well, it's a strange story, but he was gay, and there was a scandal about his affair with the son of an aristocrat, and poor old fancied himself and didn't really pull it off, and he managed to got himself arrested for gross indecency with members of the same sex. And it continued on that he spent the night in the cells. He was arraigned before a magistrate, and then a few months later, he was given 2 years hard labour, and it broke Oscar Wilde. But he is nowadays the person that people want to know about when they come to London, when I do my tours. I was reading today that there's going to be something on Netflix based on the portrait of Dorian Gray. So I wish I had a portrait in the attic, but I don't. And what we're going to do is to leave these Dubliners, these great titans of Irish literature. We're going to go out of Covent Garden. We're going to go via the Trafalgar Square and to the great street of government in London, to Whitehall. And Whitehall, as I say, is where the bureaucracy is. And this is where a young man worked for a while. That young man had come over from Cork. He was only 16 years old when he landed here in London. He came here to live with his sister, and he joined the English Civil Service via the Post Office. And the Post Office was in West London, in Hammersmith. And it was there that he was initiated into a revolutionary physical force organization called the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Now, he continued to work in the civil service. He tried to get exams and get into other departments, but he was eventually working for the Board of Trade here on this part of it. He then got another job, which was working for an American bank, and he left that job in January 1916 because he heard there might be something going on in Dublin. And he was given extra money because he gave the explanation for his leaving the job was that he wanted to fight for his country. And with the extra money that his company gave them, he gave that to the IRB, and then he took part in the Great Easter Uprising of 1916. And then he helped to organise the Irish Republican Army and take on the British. He returned to Whitehall, and that was in October 1921, when he was part of the peace negotiations, and he was at Downing Street at that time talking to people like Lloyd George and Winston Churchill. So this year will be 100 years since the Irish Free State really came into being. Right. So those are just a few people. I started talking about the Irish people who came over after the Second World War, and somebody once accused me of talking far too much about the navvies and the nurses on this one. What about the doctors and the professions as well? Well, this is the daughter of a doctor who worked in northwest London. Her name was Mary O'Brien, good Irish name, well educated, a good Catholic convent, who then was a folk singer. She was very fond of Irish songs when she first started, but she made her name as a soul singer, and perhaps the best of the British acts that went out to conquer America in the 1960s. Someone else who was also he was from Hammersmith as well, and he really made his name in about 1977 or 76. His name was Declan Mcmanus, better known to everybody else as Elvis Costello. His father was a musician, and his father was singing in a band, and he just decided to follow Sid. And he was educated in a good Irish Catholic school here in London, and he's has never looked back since. He's no longer living with us. But someone else who's also with us at the present time, her name is Imelda Clabbie. Imelda Clabbie came into London in the 1990s, and she was a singer. Her father had been a musician, and when she was singing here in London, she was singing the blues. So if you like your Ruth Brown, and if you like the Esther James, whatever the names I'm trying to get out there, she was your woman. She then went back to Ireland, and she's sort of become a folk hero, really. She's singing folk music now, and she's a huge hit. And so a lot of Irish acts have done that, make it big in London, and then go back to Ireland. And she's taking part this in the next couple of days. She's going to be virtual on one of the celebrations at the Irish Camden Centre. She'll be talking there, all part of the great celebrations that we have for St. Patrick's nowadays. And in a moment, you'll be able to see how we do the London Eye. Look at that. I bet the buildings behind there were all built by Irishmen. But no, there we are. Some happy St. Patrick's Day. We've been celebrating it really since 1996. And it used to be a lot more muted. I remember people just used to walk down Whitehall behind the banners of different Irish counties and then down to the Roman Catholic Cathedral. But nowadays, you can see everything's gone green. Huge processions through the streets, one of the largest of its type in the world. So that is a breakneck guide to Irish London. How have we done? We've done about 24 minutes of this.
Thanks so much, Tony. Thanks so much. That was so interesting. And happy St. Patrick's Day for everybody joining us. Not today, of course, in a few days, but happy celebrations anyway. Thank you so much for that, Tony. Quick question. Who would you say is your favourite Irish London? I know that's a really difficult question, but who's your favourite Irish figure?
Difficult one. Because she didn't get into the presentation, I'm going to go for another Imelda, and that's Imelda Staunton. Now, Staunton, because she's from our generation, her parents are from where my parents came from. They came from County Mayo. Her mother came from a place called Bahola. Her mother was working as a hairdresser, and she was also a very good traditional musician. And then Imelda got herself on the stage, and I remember going to see her in Guys and Dolls, and somebody telling me that the woman you've seen is actually, she's one of you lot. She's an Irish girl who's been brought up in London. And if you don't know her from the name, perhaps you'll know her as Dolores Umbridge from the Harry Potter number. I really enjoy her doing that. And the other thing that you might not have heard of is something called The Crown. Yes, it's a pub in Cricklewood. No, it's not. It's a TV program, and it's a TV program that's about a family. And she's about to play somebody with a name that begins with Q. The Queen. That's who she's going to be playing. So she is talent. And I think she's of our generation. That is somebody who I think would be one of my favourite Irish people in
Quite agree. And I have to say, I think she can be very underrated sometimes. She's wonderful in everything I ever see her in. I think she's extraordinary. So yeah, I'll take that. That's a great answer, Tony. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I can see lots of lovely comments coming in, lots of hellos. We've got a hello from Portugal, says Maria. Hi, Maria. Lovely to see you. Hello from Canada, says Kathy, hoping to visit someday. Well, look us up when you do, Kathy. We'd love to see you then. Tony can show you all the Irish stuff in London, I'm sure. Lots of people reminiscing about great Irish history. Few people tuning in from Irish places. We've got a hello from Belfast. We've got a few bits and pieces like that. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. It's been wonderful to have you. So Tony, you can, if you want to know more about Irish London, if you haven't had your fill from 20 minutes, then you can look Tony up. He's at walkinglondonhistory.co.uk. Or, of course, you can visit our very own Guide London website and look up Tony there. Tony is listed on there, as we all are at the Association of Professional Tourist Guides. Here's Tony's page. I hope you can all see it there. When you visit the website, you can look up your favourite guides. If there's anybody you've seen on the broadcasts you want to know a bit more about, you can be nosy and look us up on the website. But you'll also notice at the top of our website here, there's a little link which says London Virtual Tour. You can click on that. And if you want to book yourself a little sort of virtual excursion into London, you can. All of our guides are sort of available and happy to chat to you about different things you could have a virtual tour about: multicultural London, legal London, all sorts of bits and pieces. And if you go all the way down to the bottom here, you'll see there's a form that you can fill in, and you just say when you'd be interested in doing a tour, what it is you'd like to know a little bit more about, and then you will be selected several different guides that you can chat to, and we'll find out how we can help you and how we can show you around, because that's what they were in the business of doing, Tony, showing people London. So yes, everybody, I hope you had a wonderful afternoon. Do come and tune in next week, same time, 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. Give us a like, give us a comment. Oh, very nice, very nice. Tony's getting his Irish get up on finish. He's got the Guinness out. Look at that. Perfect way to end. Yes, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody.